and thing. So it'll be a flight from Los Angeles. So that information, I don't have the dates yet on that, but I will soon. So that is a very cool thing we're able to do. And because I'm working with this tour company and they do Birthright, I was able to get them to do it. They did it as a favor for me to allow me to do that. But all the application has to go through Birthright's main site, but we get to essentially put together the group, and yeah, you can't be older than 26.
I'm out.
You're unfortunately close, but out. No, they had made it 32, and then they brought it back down to 26. They might raise it back up, and they give first priority to people who are aging. So if you come on and you only have another year, they'll bump you up higher. But other than that, they had more applications, way more applications than they had spaces for this year. And I was talking to them the other day, one of the Birthright organizers, and they said, usually if they had somebody who backed out of a trip, they really couldn't fill the spot. They said they were filling spots 14, even 6 hours before. They were calling people and telling them if they want to go, they've got a seat, and they were filling those seats up. So that's never happened before. That's how over enrolled they were for this year. So we will have a date. We'll have like a small window where we'll give people like 2 or 3 weeks, so they'll be able to have a first dibs on. And yeah. The question isn't how old you have to be to go on Birthright. The question is, how old do I have to be before I can't go on a Birthright, before I don't have the energy to lead a Birthright trip? And it's really close.
Yeah.
I can feel the end of the energy coming. Unless there's a Hanukkah miracle, I am.
I got some inside intel on you on this last trip.
Really?
You were very much like a child.
No,
Lots of energy.
no, people had way too much. Even this trip, the people had too much energy. They wanted to stay up late, and
That was
not Jackie, but she was acting responsibly. But no, we had a good time. Yeah, it wasn't quite Birthright behavior, but it was definitely youthful behavior. Nobody got in any trouble. So we're going to start today, Jeremiah, on chapter 20. And as I mentioned last week, we started kind of dabbling into this stuff. Jeremiah really is going to show us a little bit about his life or the people who edited the book, his circle of friends. They give us some really deep insight into Jeremiah's life. Unlike any other prophet, we actually get to see what's going on with this guy as he's prophesizing, as he's going through his life. And he had a pretty eventful life. He lives right towards the end of the destruction of Jerusalem and the southern kingdom by the Babylonians. He's caught up in the midst of that. He doesn't like the Babylonians, doesn't love the Babylonians, but he realizes that they are not to be messed with, and that essentially God has chosen them to bring around this destruction. And so he doesn't want people to fight with them. He doesn't want people to side against them as they were. Who was siding against them? The Egyptians and the Assyrians. The crumbling Assyrian Empire, the last vestiges of the Assyrian Empire, were fighting against the Babylonians, trying to keep them out of what had been the Assyrian Empire. And so these other empires, the ones who had been empires, the Assyrians and the Egyptians, are fighting for their own soul, so to speak. They're fighting for their own freedom, and they're involving Judah in this fight. And Jeremiah's position is, you can't fight the Babylonians. And so, much like the Romans later on, you can't fight City Hall. You can't fight these people. They are too powerful. And according to Jeremiah, God has chosen them to do this. And we're going to see how that plays out today, especially. So here is the story of Jeremiah. Last week, we heard about him prophesizing in the temple in Jerusalem, and it clearly did its job, which is get people to pay attention to him and to what he's saying, because here's the consequence. After he prophesies in the temple, and again, the last thing we read is he stood in the court of the house of God and said to all the people, I am going to bring upon this city and all its villages all the disaster that I've decreed against it, where they have stiffened their necks and refused to heed my words. And today we see what happens. All right, Rosemary, you want to take us through?
Pashur, son of Emer the priest, who was chief officer of the house of God, heard Jeremiah prophesy these things. Pashur thereupon had Jeremiah flogged and put in the cell at the upper Benjamin gate in the house of God.
Yeah, that's not a whole lot of information about something that was clearly very important. So first of all, this guy Pashur is a priest. He's like the deputy high priest. He's not the high priest, but he's way up there. He's like an assistant high priest. And he has Jeremiah arrested and, according to this, beaten, flogged. That is it was not just, they slap on the wrist, so to speak. It could have been literally being whipped maybe up to 40 times. 40 times is the maximum amount of times, according to Jewish law, you're allowed to do that. That's more of rabbinic fix, but they kind of assumed that that's what it was for Jeremiah, but it's a beating. It's a bad beating. And it says that he's put in the upper Benjamin gate in Jerusalem. We're not exactly sure where the upper Benjamin gate is. We assume that it's a gate that went out towards the tribe of Benjamin, which is kind of all around Jerusalem, but maybe like towards the north of the city. So it was again, Jerusalem was right on the border of the tribe of Benjamin. It's kind of like in Benjamin, but it's a neutral site, but it's near the tribe of Benjamin. And so this was a gate that went out to the tribe of Benjamin, to that area, to that vicinity. And so he's put in jail there. There really aren't jails in the ancient world. They're not like prisons. There's a royal prison, maybe, where the king would put people who the king wasn't happy with. We know about the prison that Joseph gets put into by the Pharaoh, but generally there's not like a prison that like people who commit crimes get sent to. So he's put into a watched place, which is where the soldiers are, who are stationed in the gates. So he's essentially put under watch, and it's like a prison, but it's not like a jail. It's not like there were other, maybe he might have been the only prisoner there. He might have been literally left in a area surrounded by soldiers just so they can keep an eye on him. And this is part of his punishment. And all he did was, according to him, speak what God wanted him to speak. So let's see what happens with Jeremiah. And again, this is not a normal thing. Prophets are not supposed to be beaten and then arrested, but clearly he had an effect on people.
The next day, Pashur released Jeremiah from the cell. But Jeremiah said to him, God has named you not Pashur, but Magor Misabib. So
let's explain what Jeremiah just said to Pashur. He just told him, your name isn't Pashur anymore, which is essentially kind of like a nice name, like noble. That's what the name Pashur could maybe be derived from, as nobility. His name is now terror all around. Now, that doesn't, you think, well, that sounds like he's scaring people all around. No, it's more that he is, as you're going to see.
For thus said God, I am going to deliver you and all your friends over to terror. They will fall by the sword of their enemies while you look on. I will deliver all Judah into the hands of the king of Babylon. He will exile them to Babylon or put them to the sword. And I will deliver all the wealth, all the riches, and all the prized possessions of this city. And I will also deliver all the treasures of the kings of Judah into the hands of their enemies. They shall seize them as plunder and carry them off to Babylon. As for you, Pashur, and all who live in your house, you shall go into captivity. You shall come to Babylon, there you shall die, and there you shall be buried, and so shall all your friends to whom you prophesied falsely.
Yeah. So Pashur also now gets a little prophecy directed at him. And
Suppose that's
was-
better than being eaten by dogs, which was going to happen to the other people.
I guess you could say it could be worse.
He's going to get buried.
Yeah, there are some of the people who are not going to get buried. But for somebody who was just arrested and beaten and put away by this
It's
guy,
obviously not repenting what he did.
yeah, he doesn't care. He doesn't care. So he was only in jail for a day, by the way. I want to point out, he wasn't there for a long time. And
Now,
he
what do you
shouldn't-
think that was?
he shouldn't have been there at all.
Right.
There's another issue, which is that Jeremiah is a priest. He's from
Oh,
a
yeah.
priestly family. He is not necessarily some schlub who lives, on the corner that is some person that, is crazy, that goes out and starts screaming stuff. Like this idea that, a prophet was some kind of crazy person who, stood on the corner with a sign. That's not what Jeremiah was. And he seems to have been fairly, at least by some people, very well respected. He's from a respected family. He's from a priestly family and high up there in the priests. So he's not somebody to trifle with. And so
We're not used to thinking of a prophet in a suit and tie.
correct. And that's really what he was. I mean, he was a prophet who could have walked onto Wall Street or walked into the Capitol, and people would have said, yeah, he's a Bush or he's a whatever. He's connected. So he was like that. And so the fact that he was beaten at all is a pretty big statement. And the fact that now he's been beaten and he's not going to shut up is also an indication of his commitment and the fact that he's not backing down. And he, again, some of these prophecies, we've said it before, but we almost always have to say it, they're not necessarily in chronological order. So it's a little confusing because they're sometimes kind of grouped like around a theme or an idea, like prophecies about the Babylonians, stuff about Jeremiah's fights with authority. But and by the way, we got one of these guys right now. I just thought of, though people are thinking he's kind of wacky. RFK Jr.
Oh, yeah.
Not saying he's a prophet, but that guy's pretty connected, right?
Right.
Nobody's going to say that guy isn't connected. So yeah, we have people like that. Now, look, if you're a person who thinks RFK is speaking the truth, then he's your prophet. If he's not, he's a babbling idiot who's telling people not to get vaccinated. So it's a tough one. It's I just thought of that. We got a guy like that right now. Yeah.
So far, he hasn't been thrown in jail and beaten.
He hasn't been thrown in jail and beaten. No, that's true.
But that could happen.
But he's a definitely. Well, he got quasi endorsed by Trump the other day. No, he did. Trump said he might.
I apologize.
They were talking about possible running mates. He threw his name out there, but that also again could have been more of a throwing a bomb. But
that's good. We'll have two anti-Semites on the ticket.
Well, that's the other thing.
That's perfect.
Is RFK
So
said
that we could have the.
RFK had a defense.
It's going to be an interesting ticket. We got
Roger
the
Waters.
Democratic ticket, we got the Republican ticket, and maybe the no labels ticket.
Yeah,
And
but
the
that is
anti-Semite ticket.
no. It is a weird thing to think about how people leverage their. And that was really my point. What does the name carry? And Jeremiah had that. All right. So now Jeremiah is going to step into a prophecy that we assume was laid out around this time, but it could have been another time that he had a problem. But this prophecy now is, as you can see, it's laid out as a prophecy. It's laid out not with him laying out, just giving a line, but given, the biblical style prophecy with the doublets, with the repetition of language, with, a rhythm and rhyme of a biblical.
Is still the scribe?
Probably, yeah. Again, is the guy, his friend Baruch, his scribe, is taking down this stuff, and again, probably editing it, or maybe a later editor. But here's what we got. This is Jeremiah, assumedly, at some point had said something like this, and well, it goes here.
You enticed me, O Eternal One, and I was enticed. You overpowered me, and you prevailed. I have become a constant laughingstock. Everyone jeers at me. For every time I speak, I must cry out, must shout, lawlessness and rapping, for the word of God causes me constant disgrace and contempt. I thought, I will not mention it. No more will I speak in God's name. But the divine word was like a raging fire in my heart, shut up in my bones. I could not hold it in. I was helpless. I heard the whispers of the crowd, terror all around. Inform, let us inform against him. All my supposed friends are waiting for me to stumble. Perhaps he can be entrapped and we can prevail against him and take our vengeance on him. But God is with me like a mighty warrior. Therefore, my persecutors shall stumble. They shall not prevail and shall not succeed. They shall be utterly shamed with a humiliation for all time, which shall not be forgotten. O God of hosts, you who test the righteous, who examine the heart and the mind, let me see your retribution upon them, for I lay my case before you.
So if Jeremiah, if this isn't exactly when he said this and recounted this, it definitely seems like he could have said it at this point, which is, I'd like to shut up. I'd like not to get myself into trouble, but I can't. I can't help it. I have to speak the word of God. I have to tell the truth. I have to say what God's told me to say. I can't. And you can see, I feel like everyone's against me. Even my friends or supposed friends are trying to have me fall. I only have God. God knows, God's put these words in my mouth, and God will protect me. And as he asks here, I want God to vindicate me too. God, punish the people who've done this to me. He can't do it. I mean, he doesn't have the power. He doesn't have the strength that he doesn't have that political clout to do that, but he wants them to be punished. It's a normal reaction. It's not necessarily what you want to hear Jeremiah say. You'd maybe like to say, you'd like him not to have to say that part, but that's what he feels. It's 100% understandable that he feels that way. And the fact that he says it only proves to us that he's a human person. He's a person who wants the people who've been torturing him to be punished. I don't know what to say. I mean, he's not saying I'm going to do it. He doesn't let God do it. I want you to do it. Let your retribution come against him. So again, he's a human being. Now, it's not all retribution and payback.
Sing unto God, praise God who has rescued the needy from the hands of evildoers.
Yeah, that's a nice part. That's, Shiru Adonai, hallelujah, sing unto God, hallelujah. That's nice, who's rescued the needy. But there's also this.
Accursed be the day that I was born. Let not the day be blessed when my mother bore me. Accursed be the man who brought my father the news and said, a boy is born to you, and gave him such joy.
Which, by the way, only indicates that the men were not in the delivery room in those days. It was the old times where they stood outside and passed out cigars. That's clearly what's happening there. Dad got the news. But in all seriousness, I mean, this is a guy who says, I wish I hadn't been born, right? It's a very poetic way of saying it. And again, Job does the same thing when he cries out and says, I wish I had never been born. Yeah. You could say, it's pretty understood that it's the day that he was born, but it's not a good birthday message. Curse the day I was born. So that's the way he feels.
Let that man become like the cities that God overthrew without relenting. Let him hear shrieks in the morning and battle shouts at noontide. Because God did not kill me before birth, so that my mother might be my grave and her womb big with me for all time. Why did I ever issue from the womb to see misery and woe, to spend all my days in shame?
So it's a tough one. That's a tough way of looking at your existence. It's very poetic, very powerful, very graphic.
He's wishing his mother would have even died with him still inside her.
Well, here's the deal. He's not saying he wished his mother would.
Well,
die.
if she's saying he would be in the womb forever.
Well, no, that her womb would be big with her, that there would be an emptiness inside of her from where so
I see.
It's very poetic and it's very visual and it's very graphic. And it's also like, it's almost music. It's almost like a lyric from a song because it's so powerful. And we see it in poetry, obviously. Oh, it's very negative. But literally the idea that a womb could be a grave.
Oh, yeah.
You think about a person being buried.
Most of us women have gone through something like that.
Yeah. And it was very common in those days to bury people in the fetal position. It's probably, again, during the time of Jeremiah, during the earlier biblical period, where they literally buried people in the fetal position back when they buried people. And again, later on, they buried people and then they reburied them in their ossuaries. But at this time, maybe they're not doing that. They're burying people. And to some extent, if you look at a grave that they've excavated, if you look at a grave that's been excavated, it almost looks like when they dig around the body, if the body's not in a coffin, that's what I'm saying, it almost looks like the earth is a womb around the person. And you have to imagine that image, and it's very visual, it's very powerful. And so that's what he kind of says here. So it's a tough one. It's Jeremiah, as much as he's wishing the people who hurt him to be punished, he's also saying, and again, maybe, this is coming from a different point. This prophecy verse 13 didn't necessarily originally make up the same poem or same text, but this could be seen as the despair that Jeremiah is in. So let's look at more of Jeremiah's happy existence. This is Jeremiah with another dude named Pashur, but it's a different Pashur. What's really interesting, by the way.
Could Pashur actually be a title?
Could be, but it also could be a name, and probably was a name. And actually, we found a ostraca. We found a potsherd with the name Pashur in it from this period. Discovered it not in Jerusalem, but in Arad, another city. But it could have been one of these Pashurs. So this was a name, like like John or Jake or Mike or whatever. This was a name that people had during that period. This is a little confusing, but if we know the person's last name, which we know this is now Pashur, son of Malchiah, that this is a different Pashur. The other was Pashur, son of Emer. So let's look at what happens here with Jeremiah. This is a little confusing, but we'll explain it afterwards. It's not that confusing, actually. Let's take a look.
The word that came to Jeremiah from God, when King Zedekiah sent him to Pashur, son of Malchiah, and the priest Zephaniah, son of Maaseiah, to say, please inquire of God on our behalf, for King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon is attacking us. Perhaps God will act for our sake in accordance with all the prior wonders, so that he will withdraw from us. Jeremiah answered them, thus shall you say to Zedekiah, thus said the Eternal, the God of Israel, I am going to turn around the weapons in your hands with which you are battling outside the wall against those who are besieging you, the king of Babylon and the Chaldeans, and I will take them into the midst of this city, and I myself will battle against you with an outstretched mighty arm, with anger and rage and great wrath. I will strike the inhabitants of this city, both human and animal, they shall die by a terrible pestilence. And then, declares God, I will deliver King Zedekiah of Judah and his courtiers and the people, those in this city who survive the pestilence, the sword, and the famine, into the hands of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, into the hands of their enemies, into the hands of those who seek their lives. He will put them to the sword without pity, without compassion, without mercy. And to this people you shall say, thus said God, I set before you the way of life and the way of death. Whoever remains in this city shall die by the sword, by famine, and by pestilence. But whoever leaves and goes over to the Chaldeans who are besieging you shall live. He shall at least gain his life. For I have set my face against this city for evil and not for good, declares God. It shall be delivered into the hands of the king of Babylon, who will destroy it by fire.
I think you figured it out, which is Zedekiah, King Zedekiah, the last king of Judah, is basically told, no, it's over. And the best thing you can do is maybe survive if you turn yourself over to them right now. Nobody wants to hear this. Absolutely nobody wants to hear Jeremiah saying this because I mean, they're saying like,
You can imagine somebody saying this to the Ukrainians.
Yeah, it's better just give up, say, Russia, you can do whatever you want. And maybe, the people will survive. You won't be able to be a country anymore. You won't be able, but at least you'll be alive. Nobody wants to hear this. Nobody wants to hear this. And what are they saying to them? They're saying to Jeremiah, like, maybe God will do what God's done before, right? God saved us before, right? And the Assyrians weren't able to destroy us. That was only 100 years ago. The Assyrian Empire came against us, and they were really powerful, and they had to go back. They weren't able to conquer Judah. And remember, God took us out of Egypt with all those miracles. Those are a lot bigger than this. And Jeremiah says, no, there's no miracle. There's nobody going to save you. On the contrary, God is against you. Nobody wants to hear this. Nobody wants to hear this. I mean, literally, what's going to be the reaction? Because even in the best case scenario, he's saying, maybe you can survive. Like, I don't know if somebody told me, and even if I believed that Jeremiah was right, I might have said, well, I'm going to go down fighting. I'm going to go down killing these people. I don't know that after hearing that, I don't know if I would have surrendered. So it's a tough one. And you can see why Jeremiah was not making many friends. But this is what he said to them. And let me show you just real quick. This is really towards the end. So, it's possible that this is actually one of the later prophecies that he gives. But let me just show you real quick what we're talking about here. Go to our chart of the kings. So when we look at the kings, when we're talking about Zedekiah, he's right here, right? So he's the last king. Yeah, it means he starts evil and he ends evil. I that's not my judgment. That's the person who made who made this. I don't think if Zedekiah is evil, he's like evil light. Some of his other predecessors are really evil. He's maybe a fool, maybe he's like got bad advice. Even by this, you can see he's trying to get Jeremiah, like he believes in Jeremiah. He just wants to hear some good news. But the fact that he's even calling in Jeremiah shows. So this is a little confusing because the last good king is Josiah. And Josiah was a really good king. Unfortunately, he died really young. He was killed by the Egyptians. And what it seems like Josiah understood was that you don't want to be against the Babylonians. So Josiah is killed in 608. His son Zedekiah is only ruling about 20 years later. It's still Babylonians, still Babylonian times. Babylonians are the up and coming empire. And again, it all is over in 586. But Josiah understands this. And Josiah is trying to ally himself with the Babylonians. What that means, though, is Josiah runs afoul of the Egyptians. And Josiah is killed in battle fighting the Egyptians on behalf of the Babylonians, on behalf of these Eastern empires. So Josiah, understood the Babylonians were the up and comers. Josiah, has, interestingly, a few sons who become king. And this is where it's a little confusing. Jehoahaz becomes the first king. But the Egyptians don't like him, and they make his older brother, Jehoiakim, king. So Jehoahaz is not king for very long. He's basically taken captive by the Egyptians, and that's the story with him. So Jehoiakim becomes king, and then he's not king for very long. He's only king for about 10 years. And then his son, Jehoiachin, which is pretty much the same name, slightly different, but it's a little different. He's Josiah's grandson. He becomes king, but for a very, very short period of time. He's also known as Jeconiah, and he is also runs afoul of the powers that be, and he actually runs afoul of the Babylonians. The Babylonians take him into exile. So interestingly, Jehoiachin actually lives out the rest of his life in exile in Babylonia. And we actually have records of him in the Babylonian record. We have his ration records, and so we know he was kept alive by the Babylonians. The Bible says it, and the records of the Babylonians say it too. So he's not king for very long, but when Jehoiachin is deposed, then his uncle Zedekiah is made king. So you can see Josiah had three sons who were king: Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim, and Zedekiah. And this is the last king. And this is the one that actually we hear Jeremiah interacting with a lot. And he doesn't seem, that's why I don't like to say he's evil. He's tragic. I don't know that he's evil. Some of this is also based on whether they allowed idolatry to go on in the country. So that makes him evil, if he doesn't stop idol worshiping, and if he's not doing the right things in the temple. So that some of it is evil based on that as well. But this is Zedekiah. So he's the last king. Zedekiah is the one who puts up the last resistance to the Babylonians. Well, kind of the last resistance. There's actually one more fight against the Babylonians when they put up a governor. But Zedekiah is captured by the Babylonians trying to escape. They capture him. Nebuchadnezzar captures him. And right in front of him, he kills his children. Zedekiah's children are murdered in front of him. And then the last thing Zedekiah sees is his sons being murdered, because then he's blinded by Nebuchadnezzar, and the last thing he ever sees is his sons being murdered. So that is we read that in the book of Kings, and so that's not a spoiler alert. We already read that.
Why have they got it Nebuchadnezzar?
Retzer instead of Netzer. It is a scribal error which we continue to allow to be there. Yeah, but
So
it's
that's Baruch's fault, maybe, or one of his.
well, it's actually probably not his fault. It was probably a later scribe
Oh.
who did that. But we continue to allow that to be there. The nun and the resh can be occasionally transposed. Just the
That's
bottom.
just one's a little bit longer flag.
One's
than
a
the other.
little, yeah, at the bottom. So some people said it was intentionally done so that we wouldn't see his name, but it doesn't make sense because it's in other places correct. So anyways, yeah, clearly. And again, Nebuchadnezzar has an interesting role to play in the Bible, which is that he's basically doing God's work. So as much as he's a bad guy, he's also an agent of God. So there's always a weird feeling about Nebuchadnezzar in the Bible and then later on in the Midrash, because he's bad, but he's also doing what God wants. So is he an agent of God? Yeah, but he's also, so there's interesting legends about Nebuchadnezzar. So here we are. We'll continue here.
To the house of the king of Judah, hear the word of God. O house of David, thus said God, render just verdicts, morning by morning. Rescue from the defrauder anyone who is robbed, else my wrath will break forth like fire and burn with none to quench it because of your wicked acts. I will deal with you, O inhabitants of the valley, O rock of the plain, declares God. You who say, who can come down against us? Who can get into our lairs? I will punish you according to your deeds, declares God. I will set fire to its forest. It shall consume all that is around it.
Yeah. So whether that last prophecy is part of the one that Zedekiah essentially asked for or not, again, it's continuing Jeremiah's prophecies of destruction. Okay, now here's another instance where Jeremiah does what God tells him to do. And here's not going into the temple, but going into the palace.
Thus said God, go down to the palace of the king of Judah, where you shall utter this word. Say, hear the word of God, O king of Judah, you who sit on the throne of David, and your courtiers and your subjects who enter these gates. Thus said God, do what is just and right. Rescue from the defrauder anyone who is robbed. Do not wrong the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. Commit no lawless act, and do not shed the blood of the innocent in this place. For if you fulfill this command, then through the gates of this palace shall enter kings of David's line, who sit upon his throne, riding horse-drawn chariots with their courtiers and their subjects. But if you do not heed these commands, I swear by myself, declares God, that this palace shall become a ruin.
Yeah, this seems to be from an earlier time when there was still some hope that they wouldn't be destroyed. This seems to imply that like there's still a way out. So again, it doesn't really follow a chronological order, but these are examples of probably, again, grouped together, Jeremiah going into Jerusalem and telling people right to their faces what's going to happen. Again, this seems to be that like maybe the destruction won't happen, but that doesn't seem to be the case later on.
For thus said God concerning the royal palace of Judah, you are as Gilead to me, as the summit of Lebanon, but I will make you a desert, uninhabited towns. I will appoint destroyers against you, each with his tools. They shall cut down your choicest cedars and make them fall into the fire. And when many nations pass by this city and people ask one another, why did God do thus to that great city? The reply will be, because they forsook the covenant with the eternal their God and bowed down to other gods and served them.
Yeah, so it'll be a lesson.
Do not weep for the dead and do not lament for him. Weep rather for him who is leaving, for he shall never come back to see the land of his birth.
Yeah. So is that part of that one, or is that another line? This one seems to be another prophecy.
For thus said God concerning Shallum, son of King Josiah of Judah, who succeeded his father Josiah as king, but who has gone forth from this place, he shall never come back.
So if you look at it, we didn't see a King Shallum, but again, this is this son that's known as Jeconiah, or again, a king that that is essentially taken in exile.
He shall die in the place to which he was exiled, and he shall not see this land again. Ha! He who builds his house with unfairness and his upper chambers with injustice, who makes his neighbors work without pay and does not give them their wages, who thinks, I will build me a vast palace with spacious upper chambers, provided with windows paneled in cedar, painted with vermilion. Do you think you are more a king because you compete in cedar? Your father ate and drank and dispensed justice and equity. Then all went well with him. He upheld the rights of the poor and the needy. Then all was well. That is truly heeding me, declares God. But your eyes and your mind are only on ill-gotten gains, on shedding the blood of the innocent, on committing fraud and violence.
Yeah. So again, this seems to be still somewhat of a time when things could be changed, reminding people of the way they should behave. And again, this is about they're jumping around because these are all different kings that, as I showed you, are ruling at slightly different times, but over a period of only 20 years. So it's not like from 608 to 586. I mean, it's literally 20 years, 22 years. So it's not like this is happening over a long period of time, but he is talking about these kings and kind of, again, not in chronological order, but all these are prophecies that he speaks against the kings. And here's another one. This one is against Jehoiakim, who was otherwise also known as Eliakim. His name is changed, but it's also one of the kings, one of the sons of Josiah. Yeah.
Assuredly, thus said God concerning Jehoiakim, son of Josiah, king of Judah, they shall not mourn for him. Ah, brother, oh, sister, they shall not mourn for him. Oh, Lord, oh, his majesty. He shall have the burial of a donkey, dragged out and left lying outside the gates of Jerusalem. Climb Lebanon and cry out. Raise your voice in Bashan. Cry out from Abarim, for all your lovers are crushed. I spoke to you when you were prosperous. You said, I will not listen. That was your way. Ever since your youth, you would not heed me. All your shepherds shall be devoured by the wind, and your lovers shall go into captivity. Then you shall be shamed and humiliated because of all your depravity. You who dwell in Lebanon, nestled among the cedars, how much grace will you have when pains come upon you, travail as in childbirth?
Yeah. And so, again, it's Jeremiah telling people you had a chance, I've been talking to you for a while. And again, he's making fun of the beautiful accoutrement that they have in their palaces, the cedars of Lebanon, the beautiful fabrics. All of these things mean absolutely nothing. And they're not going to stop what's going to happen to you.
Basically, he's just a messenger, but it just.
Yes, and so these prophecies are grouped together. These are not, these are not like each one of these is a few verses. Here's another one.
I don't think I want to be.
As I live, declares God, if you, O King Coniah, son of Jehoiakim of Judah, were a signet on my right hand, I would tear you off even from there.
Yeah, and again, this is Coniah or Yeconiah. It's Jehoiakim. That is Jehoiakim's son. So it says right there. I mean, it says. So he was also known as King Jeconiah. So that was one of his, or King Coniah is I mean, perhaps the yud fell off. Maybe he was known as Coniah, Coniahu in Hebrew.
Or is he just
Yes, he's normally supposed to be feared, but Jeremiah doesn't have any fear of him.
No, but are people fearing Jeremiah's word?
Who know? It's a good question. Did they fear him?
His message?
Look, there are people they're upset enough about it that they arrest him and they beat him, right? So clearly they don't like it. They're going to pay attention to it, and they have to deal with him. At least they have to do something. In some cases, they ask him. So the fact that they even ask him for prophecies mean that they respect him. There's probably a big level to this, which is if this guy has the audacity to go into the king, to go into the palace, go into the temple and tell people this stuff, he must be true. It must be something to it, because how else would he have the audacity to do this?
Let's fast forward to
Now, prophecies, well, wait a second. So we know, and he's already said, there are other prophets who are saying the opposite from him, which is that everything's going to be okay. All we have to do is just wait it out and the Babylonians will go away. God's going to come to our aid. We don't have those prophecies because they were wrong. But we hear in Jeremiah, when he talks about those prophets, we know from his side what they're saying. So we know a little bit of what they're doing.
But you think if he's a leader, that people would be joining in on this and they'd be moving forward and trying to come to some resolve, but where's the resolve here? He's just babbling on and on and on.
So he had followers. There are people who follow Jeremiah. There are people who like Jeremiah. There are people who trust Jeremiah. How do we know that? Because Jeremiah survived. And the only way he survived is if people helped him, protected him, and then rescued him. He survived this craziness. Again, the amazing thing about him is that he goes on and on. Like we're almost done with this section. In section 25, it's going to kind of shift a little bit, but after today. But what's interesting about Jeremiah is that as negative as he is, and as I told you from the beginning, his name is synonymous. Like the English word Jeremiah it's an English word. It means a litany of bad things. His name is synonymous with bad news. But because he has other messages, because his message in the end isn't about giving up, you really have to think, oh, well, this guy was pretty negative for the most part, but he didn't give up. He didn't give up. He was. But it's his prophecies of hope that in the end are going to be okay, that you go, oh, I guess we'll make it.
Is this where the song Jeremiah was a bulldog?
Bullfrog.
Bullfrog?
Yeah, we don't know why he. I seen a story
probably
about.
just because it fit the meter.
Well, actually, I looked it up a while ago.
Did you?
A while ago, and it was not supposed to be Jeremiah. The original lyric that they had thought of was going to be no. I think they said let me see. They had toyed with other names for that. Let's see. Here's what it said. Here, I'm going to show you. No, it's a good question. I mean, that's where he's known as. It says, Axton, the guy who wrote the song, right, said the chorus and the melody already written. He added some placeholder lyrics. He says, Jeremiah was an expedient at the time. I had the chorus for 3 months. I took wine, leaned in the spirit. Jeremiah was a bullfrog. It was meaningless. It's a temporary lyric before I could write it. They cut it and it was a hit. But they're saying it was
Fit
not.
the meter.
Yeah. So, so I'm not really sure what to take away from that other than it's become probably the people know that Jeremiah more than they know the original Jeremiah. But it is interesting that again, does not seem a happy guy, at least for 90% of this, 95% of that, 99% of it. He doesn't seem that happy. He doesn't like what he's doing. He doesn't like the fact that he has to do this. I mean, he doesn't like it. He says, I wish I had never been born. He doesn't like it. It's not like he takes joy in this role that he has. He doesn't like it. He's not relishing being the bearer of bad news. So here,
How is God getting this message to him in his sleep?
it doesn't really say, he says, God told me. We don't know exactly. Prophets sometimes, it seems, get visions. They're told what to say. They know what to say. They know what to say. Here's, but he speaks on behalf of God. Here's what he says.
Where are we?
I will deliver.
Here, I will deliver you into the hands of those who seek your life, into the hands of those you dread, into the hands of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, and into the hands of the Chaldeans. I will hurl you and the mother who bore you into another land where you were not born. There you shall both die. They shall not return to the land that they yearn to come back to. Is this man Coniah a wretched broken pot, a vessel no one wants? Why are he and his offspring hurled out and cast away in a land they knew not? Oh, land, 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 hear the word of God. Thus said God, record this man as without succession, one who shall never be found acceptable, for none of his offspring shall be accepted to sit on the throne of David and to rule again in Judah.
Now, that's not something that King Coniah would like to hear.
You're doomed, and in the horse you rode in on.
Yeah. Yes, Rosemary she does speak the word of God. She said she'd pay for you to do this, Rosemary. You're definitely speaking the word of God. Now, I will tell you this. What's so weird
I
about
hope I'm not going to be thrown in jail and flogged.
Now, what's so weird about the end of this, folks? I want to show you one really, really weird thing. I'm going to show you something weird. I promise. So what's the last thing that she said? For none of his offspring shall be accepted to sit on the throne of David and to rule Judah as a king, right? It says that. Jeremiah chapter 22. Now, as I told you, we know he goes into exile into Babylonia and survives. Zedekiah's kids get all killed in front of him. Now, we don't know exactly what happens to Jeconiah. There's a tradition in the rabbinic tradition that his descendants become exilarchs. They become almost de facto rulers of the Jewish community in Babylonia, almost like we had kind of some autonomy in Babylonia, and we're ruled by Jewish people who kind of have some power over us, like almost like a king. We call them the Reish Galuta, the head of the exile, or they're called exilarchs, leaders. And so Jeremiah says he's thrown out, he's going to go into exile. And the rabbis also say maybe he survived. Now, here's the weird thing. There was definitely a tradition that him and that they survived. Why? Because check this out. This is a Christian Bible. This is the book of Matthew. And there's this really interesting genealogy of Jesus. Now, why does Jesus have a genealogy in the first place? It's a good question, right? Because if God's his father, it doesn't really matter who his earthly father is. But there were definitely people who thought it was very important that Joseph, right, his father, was descendant of King David. Where? Because it says right here, David had Solomon, and Solomon had Rehoboam, and go all the way through. Here's Josiah. Remember Josiah? There's Josiah, and Josiah is the father of Jeconiah. Well, he's also the father of Jehoahaz. He was the father of Jeconiah, and he was also the father of Zedekiah. But it says here, we know he survived. And Josiah, the father of Jeconiah and his brothers at the time of the exile of Babylonia. After the exile of Babylonia, Jeconiah was the father of Shealtiel and Zerubbabel and Abihud. And we go all the way through this list of people we don't know about, but the Christian Bible seems to say that they existed. And Jacob was the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary. Holy moly. The Christians just gave us a tradition. And again, we don't think that they're necessarily doing anything other than maybe giving us what there was a Jewish tradition, which was that Jeconiah 100% had a child and had a family. Jeremiah just said none of his children will ever rule Judah again. Christian Bible just said Jeconiah had a child, and one of those descendants becomes Jesus. That's pretty wild. So I told you, it's pretty wild. And it's a throwaway line that isn't really throwaway. And unfortunately, most Jews don't know that that is actually what the Christian Bible did with it, which is to some extent say, he does have a son who's going to become the king of Judah, and not just the king of Judah, but he's going to become the king of all time. Yep.
So Jeconiah is Jeremiah.
No, Jeconiah is the king during during his time.
Great.
Again, looking at that list, I'll show you again real quick. There's the kings, right? Here's the kings. Here's the kings. There's Josiah. There's Jehoahaz. There's Jehoiakim. There's Jehoiachin. And there's Zedekiah. So you can see this is where he is.
So Jeconiah has the child.
Has a family that becomes the kings. Yeah. Well, that's not what the Christian Bible said. Now,
And this is still all Old Testament.
well, that is the Christian Bible just said that he has a descendant that will eventually, those descendants 10 generations on later will be Jesus's dad. But Jesus's dad isn't his dad.
Because it's God.
So that's an interesting little bit right there.
Hmm.
You didn't know that there's a little overlap, or not overlap, but a usage of that in a weird way. So, don't know what to tell you, but there was a tradition. That's the tradition. All right. Again, I think the Christian tradition kept the Jewish tradition, which is that there was a line of kings from David that could be traced back through Jeconiah. Okay. All right. By the way, there are other parts of that lineage that I just showed you quickly from Matthew, which don't quite make sense, but it's not like they invented that lineage. There were probably also Jewish lineages or Jewish source. There was a
Like
Jewish source. to that
another lineage that's got like slightly different names in a different book.
Correct. So it's not, well, yeah, well, it's based on the Bible.
Right.
But we know that those lineages existed because Josephus refers to those lineages, and they're slightly different. So I just want to make it clear that the lineage, don't think that lineage I didn't go through it. I can show it to you. I didn't do it. Christian scholars have shown how that lineage is different from other sources. So I don't want to waste time on it other than to tell you it is relevant, and it is relevant in the sense that it's also in the Christian Bible to some extent. All right. So did the Jews have a pretender who could say that they were a person who could trace themselves back to King David? At least according to the Christian Bible, there was. And again, according to Jewish sources, there were too. The exilarchs traced their ancestry back to King David. All right. So let's take a look at this chapter. Well, let's take a look at chapter 23.
Shepherds who let the flock of my pasture stray and scatter, declares God. Assuredly, thus said the Eternal, the God of Israel, concerning the shepherds who should tend my people. It is you who let my flock scatter and go astray. You gave no thought to them, but I am going to give thought to you for your wicked acts, declares God. And I myself will gather the remnant of my flock from all the lands to which I have banished them, and I will bring them back to their pasture, where they shall be fertile and increase. And I will appoint over them shepherds who will tend them. They shall no longer fear or be dismayed, and none of them shall be missing, declares God.
Well, that's nice. That's a more positive little prophecy here, which is again, these people have not done a good job, and the people who should have known better, right? The shepherds of the flock, the priests, the kings, the prophets, those people should have done a better job, but they haven't. But I'm going to bring them back, and I'm going to gather them myself, and I will bring them back to the land, and they will be okay. So that's kind of a nice prophecy, right? Yeah, we need that now. Yep. And here we go.
A time is coming, declares God, when I will raise up a true branch of David's line. He shall reign as king and shall prosper, and he shall do what is just and right in the land. In his days, Judah shall be delivered, and Israel shall dwell secure. And this is the name by which it shall be called. God is our vindicator.
Now, it's natural to think that based on what we've been reading from Jeremiah, that this is a long way into the future. There's a problem here with that, which is that if we look at his name, God is our vindicator. Adonai Tzidkenu, that's the word, Tzidkenu, that it's probably a play on the name Zedekiah. So it's very possible that this prophecy was actually laid out for King Zedekiah. So there might have been a time when Jeremiah thought Zedekiah was going to be the king we've all been waiting for. So this is why it kind of jumps around a little bit, and like it's hard to, the reason that I'm pointing it out is because you'd think, well, wait a second. Didn't he just say Zedekiah is, going to be, this could have also been written before, and when the hopes and aspirations for King Zedekiah were maybe he's going to fix everything. We don't know, other than the fact that his name, Zedekiah, is very close to this name, Tzidkenu, which is the root tzedakah, right? Vindication, justice. It could be he talking about somebody in the future, but it also could be that he's talking about Zedekiah. At least that's what we understand it to be. It's presumably a play on it. Could be. Yeah, there are people who've interpreted this to be somebody who will reign in the future, right? So whether it's Jesus or again, there were probably Christians who felt that was Jesus. Look, the reason that we have that whole Matthew genealogy was because there were people who wanted it to be Jesus and literally that he was a descendant of David, right? So it says right here, and we use this phrase even today in Jewish tradition, Tzemach David, right? Tzemach Tzaddik, a righteous and true branch. A tzemach is the family tree, the lineage that a branch. We still say the word today, a branch. So a tzemach is literally like a tree branch, but it's like a family tree. He's going to raise up a line. Again, Zedekiah was another one of Josiah's children. So they're basically saying, okay, that line of Jeconiah and Joachim, that's done. And there's another son that Josiah has. Maybe that one will be better. So it could be that he's talking about that line, or he's talking about somebody in the future. But we still say that today. We still talk about a Tzemach David. We still talk about a branch of King David. The reason that the Christians had that whole genealogy was because they literally believed, there were a lot of Jews who believed, and maybe early Christians believed, that person had to be a descendant of King David. Had to be. Couldn't be a king unless he was a descendant of King David. So are we still looking for that person? Depends. If you believe that it literally has to be a person, it has to be a Messiah, son of a descendant of David. But that's what he says right here. So could it be someone in the future, or was it somebody who was right around the corner, Zedekiah? That's the problem with a prophecy is once it's been laid out, it could have already happened, could have happened 1,000 years ago, could be happening 1,000 years from now. From when? Well, Jesus was 600 years later. 600 years. And now we're talking 2,600 years later. There's still people who are saying that descendant of King David is going to be there. And that's why people who are looking for the bloodline of Jesus in the Holy Grail, right? That's why being a descendant of King David is still important. Look, there, I saw a scroll, or was it? Oh, it was I think it was in the Met. That was a scroll from the Middle Ages that traced the kings of England back to well, that's kind of what the whole Holy Grail, what's it called? The Da Vinci Code thing was about, was that they believed that they were descendants through Jesus to the line of David. So there are people who believe that that's still in play, that somebody is still, there's that descendant of King David is still around the corner, right? He says the time is coming, right? Hine yamin ba'im. There will be a time to come. Was it next week? Was that what he was talking about with King Zedekiah? Or is it 2,000 years later? So here's again, yamin ba'im, in days to come.
Assuredly, a time is coming, declares God, when it shall no more be said, as God lives, who brought the Israelites out of the land of Egypt, but rather, as God lives, who brought out and led the offspring of the house of Israel from the northland and from all the lands to which I have banished them, and they shall dwell upon their own soil.
When you talk about prophecies coming true, don't people say that that's what happened since 1948? Right? So there are people who say that that's what. Now, when the Northland, we assume that means Babylonia and Assyria, those kingdoms that had exiled us, that will be brought back from those places. But there were a whole lot of Jews that came to Israel from the north, and much farther north than there. Talking about Poland and Ukraine and Russia and England and Scandinavia and all those places really far north that came and were brought back to the land of Israel. So maybe that happened during that time, coming in from the lands of the north. And it's funny, it's going to be like, remember how we used to talk about God who took us out of Egypt? We're going to talk about God who brought us out of all these other places.
Concerning the prophets, my heart is crushed within me. All my bones are trembling. I have become like someone drunk, like one overcome by wine, because of God and because of God's holy word. For the land is full of adulterers. The land mourns because of a curse. The pastures of the wilderness are dried up, for they run to do evil. They strain to do wrong. For both prophet and priest are godless. Even in my house, I find their wickedness, declares God.
Yeah. So again, are they talking about, literally adultery, or is it because they're worshiping other gods? But again, the line here, which is pretty powerful, they run to do evil, they strain to do wrong, right? They are doing everything they can to do the wrong thing. So.
Assuredly, their path shall become like slippery ground. They shall be thrust into darkness, and there they shall fall. For I will bring disaster upon them, the year of their doom, declares God.
Yeah. So all these lines that declare God could be separate prophecies, or they could be, again, this is very short, could go with the previous one. But whenever it says Ne'um Adonai, it's almost like a chorus, or like the end of an idea, or some kind of coda. Declares God, Ne'um Adonai. Now here's a really, I think, an interesting one, which kind of shows you the psychology of what people were doing.
In the prophets of Samaria, I saw a repulsive thing. They prophesied by Baal and led my people Israel astray. But what I see in the prophets of Jerusalem is something horrifying: adultery and false dealing. They encourage evildoers so that no one turns back from their own wickedness. To me, they are all like Sodom, and all its inhabitants like Gomorrah.
Yeah. So again, those are cities that are synonymous with wickedness, and Jerusalem's become like Sodom and Gomorrah. And it's interesting because he says, look, in the northern kingdom, when the northern kingdom got destroyed, when Samaria was destroyed, right? When the kingdom of Israel was destroyed, it was based in Samaria, Shomron. The people were worshiping another god. They were worshiping Baal, right? And that's why they were doing it. But here, they say they're worshiping me, but they're doing all these bad things. It's horrible. Because I expect, like, at least in Judah, they're not gonna worship Baal, but they're encouraging bad behavior, right?
Assuredly, thus said God of hosts concerning the prophets, I am going to make them eat wormwood and drink a bitter draught. For from the prophets of Jerusalem, godlessness has gone forth to the whole land. Thus said God of hosts, do not listen to the words of the prophets who prophesy to you. They are deluding you. The prophecies they speak are from their own minds, not from the mouth of God. They declare to those who despise me, God has said, all shall be well with you. And to all who follow their willful hearts, they say, no evil shall befall you.
So the prophets that you have, the other prophets besides Jeremiah, are lying to you. They're telling you everything's going to be okay. Nothing bad's going to happen. I'm telling you, those are false prophets. These are prophets who are not speaking from God. They're deluding you. Yep. The other prophets working with Jeremiah at Jeremiah's time are doing the exact opposite. Yeah, they're doing the exact opposite of what. No.
This happens over and over again, right? It's not a new problem.
Yep. So these are the people who are working at the same time as Jeremiah. They're telling you it's going to be okay. Here's the, here's the real word.
But he who has stood in God's counsel and seen and heard God's word, he who has listened to that word must obey. Lo, God's storm goes forth in fury, a whirling storm. It shall whirl down upon the heads of the wicked. The anger of God shall not turn back till it has fulfilled and completed God's purposes. In the days to come, you shall clearly perceive it. I did not send those prophets, but they rushed in. I did not speak to them, yet they prophesied. If they have stood in my counsel, let them announce my words to my people and make them turn back from their evil ways and wicked acts. Am I only a God near at hand, says God, and not a God far away? If somebody enters a hiding place, do I not see them, says God? For I fill both heaven and earth, declares God.
Yep. So I'm not a God that, I can't hide from me, right? So again, these prophets are causing huge damage. I didn't send them in. I didn't tell them to come. And you can understand why they're doing what they're doing. These times are crazy. People are looking they're looking for answers. And Jeremiah says, God's telling you that he didn't tell these people to do what they're doing. They're speaking on their own behalf. They're doing what they're doing what the powers want them to do, saying what they want to be, they want to hear. And again, it's natural for that to have happened. I showed you there were 5 kings in the period of 20 years. That's not stability. Some of the kings were kings for less than a year. So people are looking at this stuff saying, well, there's craziness happening. And so what's the answer? Where's the answer? And the people are hearing this message from their prophets, which is that everything's going to be okay. And it's not going to be okay. Now, look, we have people who are prophesizing doom and destruction, global warming, economic catastrophe. It's not like they're not heard. I mean, we hear them. The question is, you can make the argument that there are more of them than there are the prophets who are saying everything's going to be okay. I mean, when people talk about global warming, they say, okay, well, 99% of the, scientists say this. And then people are saying, yeah, but not all of them say it. but 99% say there's a problem. So, and look, I mean, you can just look and see that there's a problem. We can see that there's we have too many fires that are causing smoke that's causing, that's causing, more problems. And we can't figure out, we know that there's a problem. We know that there's problems. So it's not like we don't have prophets that tell us that. It's what do we use to lull us into a sense of calm today? So is it the 1%, or is it the people who have power who say, well, don't pay attention to those people? Or is it, again, just the fact that it's always better not to think about it? Do we really need to have prophets that come in and tell us the exact opposite? Because we don't, we can also just turn it off, just not pay attention to it. So
You don't have to deny it. You just have to create doubt.
create doubt and just allow people to be comfortable
Right.
while the stuff is
Like,
burning out.
the cigarette companies figured that out, and then everybody that had a similar issue, used their playbook.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that we know it. We've seen it. It's been
We know
it's
what
been-
they're doing. We know
it's been-
exactly what they're
it's
doing,
been
but we
doc-
haven't
it's been
figured out how to
documented.
counter it.
But again, I don't even think, like I said, I don't even think you need to have somebody say the opposite. It's just we just get bored of it, and we don't pay attention to it, and we don't want to hear it. So it's much easier just to be comfortable and just close your eyes and go to sleep. So, but Jeremiah is contending with actually people who are saying the exact opposite, and they're actually in the majority. So it's tough. We don't quite live in those days today, though. I mean, that's the interesting thing, is I don't think we need to even have prophets coming against the other prophets. It's the other prophet. So and again, the way God says it through Jeremiah is like, I know what's going on. God knows what's going on. God sees all this stuff. There's no hiding place. I'm there. I see what's happening. God sees what's happening. I'm everywhere. I feel everything. There's no place where I can't, I can't see what's happening.
I have heard what the prophets say, who prophesy falsely in my name. I had a dream. I had a dream. How long will there be in the minds of the prophets who prophesy falsehood, the prophets of their own deceitful minds? The plan to make my people forget my name by means of the dreams that they tell each other, just as their ancestors forgot my name because of Baal.
Yeah. What's interesting, I think, about this phrase that Jeremiah puts out there is exactly what Marcy just said. How did they know it's a prophet, right? Did he have a dream, right? Well, Jeremiah seems to be saying, everyone goes around saying that. Look, we could make the argument that that's one of the most famous prophecies that we had in the modern era, right? I have a dream, right? The Martin Luther King, Dr. King Jr.'s prophecy and dream speech is one of the most famous prophecies that we've had in the modern era. So it's not like we don't understand that. It's not like we don't get that language. When somebody came forward to say, I had a dream, what was it? A dream that they wanted to hear? What people wanted to hear? So what would you say about those dreams? They tell each other dreams, and the dreams are not true. They're BS. So that's a problem. That's a problem with people saying that they have a dream, and sometimes they're lies, right? And that's what he says. So, well, let's look what he says specifically.
Let the prophet who has a dream tell the dream, and let the one who has received my word report my word faithfully. How can straw be compared to grain, says God? Behold, my word is like fire, declares God, and like a hammer that shatters rock. Assuredly, I am going to deal with the prophets, declares God, who steal my words from one another. I am going to deal with the prophets, declares God, who wag their tongues and make oracular utterances. I am going to deal with those prophets who prophesy lying dreams, declares God, who relate them to lead my people astray with their reckless lies when I did not send them or command them. They do this people no good, declares God.
I don't know. That's very powerful because that's what people do today. They say that they're prophets and they say that they're. So how do you know?
The reckless lying network.
How do you know? How do you know?
And when this people or a prophet or a priest asks you, what is the burden of God? You shall answer them. What is the burden? I will cast you off, declares God. As for the prophet or priest or lay person who shall say, the burden of God, I will punish them and their household.
Now, I will tell you
Is that
this. Yeah, let's talk about that for a quick second. We have the phrase burden of God or pronouncement, Masa Adonai. We have that phrase in Isaiah. Okay. So we understand that prophets would speak. So the context of this is really important. People would talk about the burden. They would use that phrase, the burden of God, for their prophecy. So he's talking about language that like they understood because that's what the prophets would come and say. I have a prophecy. I have a burden of God, Masa Adonai. So what Jeremiah basically just said is they always say that. They always say it's a burden of God. But what is the burden? The burden is it's over. Anybody who's going around and saying, I've got the burden of God, but the burden of God is not that this is all coming to an end, is lying to you. And Jeremiah says God's going to punish those people. So the burden, there is no burden other than this is all over. But he's playing off the language of what people were using. And they used that phrase. They said, must I have the burden of God? He's like, there's only one burden now. It's over. So that's what he's saying. And that's like he's saying, everyone else who's saying that phrase right now, they're misusing it and it's a lie. There's only one burden. It's over.
Thus you shall all speak to your neighbors and to your kin. What has God answered or what has God spoken? But do not mention the burden of God anymore. Does anyone regard their own word as a burden that you pervert the words of the living God, God of hosts, our God? Thus you shall speak to the prophet. What did God answer you or what did God speak? But if you say the burden of God, assuredly, thus said God, because you said this thing, the burden of God, whereas I sent word to you not to say the burden of God, I will utterly forget you, and I will cast you away from my presence, together with the city that I gave to you and your ancestors. And I will lay upon you a disgrace for all time, shame for all time, which shall never be forgotten.
So Jeremiah is basically saying any other prophet that's saying anything other than this is all over is a liar. So he's basically saying, don't trust anybody who's using those words. God doesn't want you to use those words anymore. It's over. So that's a pretty dark pronouncement. Again, we're going to read one more chapter today, probably, and that let me just see. Yeah. Now this one is a very short chapter. So we probably are, if we can get to end of 25, we'll see next week a move away from this. But this is an interesting prophecy. Again, very visual prophecy. This is 24, very short chapter.
God showed me 2 baskets of figs placed in front of the temple of God. This was after King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon had exiled King Jeconiah, son of Jehoiakim of Judah, and the officials of Judah, and the artisans and smiths, and had brought them from Jerusalem to Babylon.
Yeah, and by the way, I just want to show you something real quick. And this is not to not to be too confusing, but Let me just show you something real quick. This is an example of let me just show you. Like one problem with this with the genealogy is that in Matthew it actually says Josiah was the father of Jeconiah, and they have a note here. You know, Josiah wasn't Jeconiah's father; he was his grandfather. So that's an error. I mean, that's literally skipping over. You know, so again, Josiah, these are his sons, Jehoiakim, and Jehoiakim is Jeconiah's father. So it's actually Josiah was his grandfather. It's an intentional skip, by the way, but I guess they figured no one would go back into the Bible to look at it, but it's actually not correct. The reason, by the way, that it exists like that is because there are there are 10 generations from Jeconiah to Joseph, and there's 10 from Solomon to well, I'll just show you real quick. Yeah, Jehoiakim doesn't fit because it goes Solomon, Rehoboam, Abijah, Asa, Jehoshaphat, Jehoram, Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, Manasseh, and it's the same amount from here to there. So, it's 14 generations from Abraham, not 10. It's 14 to Abraham to David, 14 from David to the exile, and 14 from the exile to the Messiah. It just fits. It's not. It's just, he just cut out, but it fits, but it's not accurate. I mean, it's to make these genealogies fit,
Right.
but they're not. But that's not what it was. I mean, it's factually not. That's not the case. Anyways, I mean, we know that. I mean, it reminds us right here in Jeremiah that Jeconiah was the son of Jehoiakim. In a sense, he becomes a king like his father and his uncles, right? Two of his uncles were kings too, but he wasn't. He was the only one of the kings in those times that was actually Josiah's grandson and not his son. Anyways,
They wanted to have 2 sevens.
it's confusing, but he's also the only one who had kids. And so
Yeah.
Jeconiah is the only one who could really be the ancestor because he's the only one who survives. But it
Mhm.
also doesn't fit the genealogy of 14, 14, and 14, which, look, we did the same thing. We have genealogies that are clearly symbolic. 10 generations from Adam to Noah, and 10 generations from Noah to Abraham. I mean, I don't know. It seems a little symbolic. Anyways, so let's look at this little prophecy. It's a very interesting short prophecy that Jeremiah has here.
One basket contained very good figs, like first ripened figs, and the other basket contained very bad figs, so bad that they could not be eaten. And God said to me, "What do you see, Jeremiah?" I answered, "Figs, the good ones are very good, and the bad ones very bad, so bad that they cannot be eaten." Then the word of God came to me. "Thus said the Eternal, the God of Israel, as with these good figs, so will I single out for good the Judean exiles whom I have driven out from this place to the land of the Chaldeans. I will look upon them favorably, and I will bring them back to this land. I will build them and not overthrow them. I will plant them and not uproot them. And I will give them the understanding to acknowledge me, for I am God, and they shall be my people, and I will be their God, when they turn back to me with all their heart. And like the bad figs, which are so bad that they cannot be eaten, thus said God, so will I treat King Zedekiah of Judah and his officials and the remnant of Jerusalem that is left in this land, and those who are living in the land of Egypt. I will make them a horror, an evil to all the kingdoms of the earth, a disgrace and a proverb, a byword and a curse in all the places to which I banish them. I will send the sword, famine, and pestilence against them until they are exterminated from the land that I gave them and their ancestors.
So if you get carried away into Babylonia, you'll be okay. If you're not, bad things are going to happen to you. What's so interesting about that is that, as I already told you, Jeremiah does not get taken to Babylonia. He gets taken to where?
Egypt.
Egypt. It's not where he wanted to go. It's not where he just said good things happen. No, those are not good places to go to. So again, we have this. We have these three bad things that are always put together: sword, famine, and pestilence. We mentioned those are three of the four horsemen. The question of what the four horsemen were for us, maybe the fourth would be exile. Sometimes it's death. It seems like all these other ones are also death, but in the Christian Bible, it's death is the fourth horseman. But yeah, they're used together in Jeremiah a lot as bad things. Yeah. So Jeremiah does not get to do what he wanted to do, which is maybe either go into exile in Babylonia or survive, be a good fig. You don't want to be a bad fig. And that is the little prophecy that's in chapter 24. It's kind of a standalone, unique prophecy. And now we're going to finish with chapter 25, which is kind of an end to this unit, the first 25 chapters of Jeremiah, which are for the most part very similar to what we've been reading. Next week, it's going to shift a little bit away from that. So here's chapter 25.
The word that came to Jeremiah concerning all the people of Judah in the 4th year of King Jehoiakim, son of Josiah of Judah, which was the 1st year of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon.
Yeah, so that clearly is out of order, right? So again, I never said that this was going to be, I said it's not meant to be chronological, or there's no intention of putting it chronologically. So now we're back to King Jehoiakim, who is Jehoiakim or Jeconiah's father. So it's gone back a little bit in time. So here's a prophecy, but it's a critical one. So that's, and again, somebody, editor, scribe, whoever decided to do this, decided to put this here at the end of this section. Let's take a look. This is again the beginning of Nebuchadnezzar's reign.
This is what the prophet Jeremiah said to all the people of Judah and to all the inhabitants of Jerusalem. From the 13th year of King Josiah, son of Ammon of Judah, to this day, these 23 years, the word of God has come to me. I have spoken to you persistently, but you would not listen. Moreover, God constantly sent all his servants, the prophets, to you, but you would not listen or incline your ears to hear when they said, turn back every one from your evil ways and your wicked acts, that you may remain throughout the ages on the soil that God gave to you and your ancestors. Do not follow other gods to serve them and worship them. Do not vex me with what your own hands have made, and I will not bring disaster upon you.
So Jeremiah said, up until now, I've been warning you. The other prophets, the good prophets, have been warning you to change your ways. We've been telling you this for years. We've been telling you to change your ways, get on the right path, and that God will help you. Don't worship other gods. Don't do those kinds of things. Turn back from your evil ways, your wicked acts. We've been telling you this for years. Years and years we've been telling you.
But you would not listen to me, declares God, but vexed me with what your hands made to your own hurt. Assuredly, thus said God of hosts, because you would not listen to my words, I am going to send for all the peoples of the north, declares God, and for my servant, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, and bring them against this land and its inhabitants, and against all those nations round about. I will exterminate them and make them a desolation, an object of hissing, ruins for all time. And I will banish from them the sound of mirth and gladness, the voice of bridegroom and bride, and the sound of the mill and the light of a lamp.
Yep. And so he's saying it's over now. King Nebuchadnezzar is coming, and it's done. And we have this phrase again: I will banish from your midst the kol sason v'kol simcha, kol chatan v'kol kala. You're not going to have that anymore. You're not going to have the sound of happiness. You're not going to have the sound of a wedding, which again, as I told you before, this is the part that we say at a wedding. Kol sason v'kol simcha, kol chatan v'kol kala. It's part of this. It's part of the 7 blessings. We say this today to affirm that this is the sound of gladness. This is the sound of joy. This is good news. This is good stuff.
She never answered me,
So we don't, we say the opposite. We say, this is the sound. These are the sounds that we want to hear. This is the sounds of life.
This whole land shall be a desolate ruin, and those nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. When the 70 years are over, I will punish the king of Babylon and that nation in the land of the Chaldeans for their sins, declares God, and I will make it a desolation for all time. And I will bring upon that land all that I have decreed against it, all that is recorded in this book, that which Jeremiah prophesied against all the nations.
Folks, this is why it's here. It's over. It's over. There's no more warnings. It's done. There's no way to turn back anymore. It's happening. But it's 70 years. Because at the end of 70 years, the Babylonians are going to be done. And that's it. It's a 70-year time. This is why Jeremiah is in the Bible. That's why Jeremiah is considered such an important prophet. Because what he said happened. That's what happened. We don't know how to explain it other than that's exactly what happened.
And how many years is this for Jeremiah that he's been saying this?
Well, he's basically saying all the way back to, we've been saying this all the way back for 25 years. We've been saying this for 25 years. We've been warning you. We've been trying to get you to do the right thing. You wouldn't do the right thing. And there's no hope. And it's going to now, I've just now told you, it's 70 years. It's destroyed. It's going to happen, but it's going to be a 70-year process.
So
And then
he's
you'll
in
come back.
Egypt, prophesied against
No,
them?
not yet.
Not yet.
Not
He
yet.
just went back
This
to
is it. No, this is, yes, I said, this is from King Jehoiakim. This is from his time there, which is, I told you, just so you can look at the time. Here it is right here. We know when he said it. Right here. About 608. Right?
If
During this time.
he's wrong, nobody who's alive now is going to be alive then to say so.
Correct. So he's saying this 14 years before the destruction, right? So he's saying this around 14, 15 years before the destruction, 20 years, let's say, before the destruction. No, not 20, 14, say 12, whatever. I mean, 15 years before the destruction. And he's saying that 70 years later, we're going to come home. So yeah, the person's going to be 85. If there's a kid alive right now, they're born the year he says this, they'll be 85 when this comes to fruition. But he says it, and this is what happens. And this is why Jeremiah is so important for us, right? So it's going to happen. So, this is what it's going to be 70 years. All right. Wait, by the way, but it also says Jeremiah prophesies against all the nations. We haven't gotten there yet. We haven't gotten there yet. That's something we're going to get to, which is that Jeremiah talked about the other nations too that are going to be affected by the Babylonians. So we haven't gotten there yet. So again, this is the end or the beginning of what Jeremiah has been saying all along, but now, this is the most powerful version of it here.
You have to scroll up a little. I think we didn't read.
So no, we said Jeremiah prophesies against all the nations because this is
Okay.
what's going to happen.
And I will, for they to.
No, you read that part.
Did I? Okay.
Yeah, I
For
think
they
so.
to- I
Yeah.
don't think so.
Okay, so read it.
I thought, yeah, okay. I will bring upon that land all that I have decreed against it, all that is recorded in this book, that which Jeremiah prophesied against all the nations. For they too shall be enslaved by many nations and great kings, and I will requite them according to their acts and according to their conduct. For thus said the Eternal, the God of Israel, to me, take from my hand this cup of wine of wrath, and make all the nations to whom I send you drink of it. Let them drink and retch and act crazy because of the sword that I am sending among them. So I took the cup from God's hand and gave drink to all the nations to whom God had sent me, Jerusalem and the towns of Judah and its kings and officials, to make them a desolate ruin, an object of hissing and a curse, as is now the case. Pharaoh, king of Egypt, his courtiers, his officials, and all his people, all the mixed peoples, all the lands of the kings of the land of Uz, all the kings of the land of the Philistines, Ashkelon, Gaza, Ekron, and what is left of Ashdod.
Those were the big cities of the Philistines. Those were, and again, the mixed people, we're not really sure, again, but people who are maybe the Midianites, different kinds of groups, Bedouins, are made up of different people. Land of Uz is, we know about that land from Job. Job is from that land. It's probably an area of Yemen, Saudi Arabia. Other countries.
Edom, Moab, and Ammon.
On
All the
Jordan.
kings of Tyre and all the kings of Sidon and all the kings of the coastland across the sea.
That's Lebanon, right? The Phoenicians in Tyre and Sidon, the kings of the coastlands, right, are probably, again, Aegean type peoples, right? Or Phoenician type peoples, people who are living on the land, who are living out there.
Dedan, Tema, and Buz, and all those who have their hair clipped, all the kings of Arabia, and all the kings of the mixed peoples who live in the desert, all the kings of Zimri, and all the kings of Elam, and all the kings of Media, all the kings of the north, whether far from or close to each other, all the royal lands that are on earth, and last of all, the king of Sheshach shall drink.
Now that's weird. All these different kings, all these different countries are going to have their comeuppance too. They're all going to get hit. And we know those places. I mean, some of them we don't know exactly because they're mixed peoples. But what is this king of Sheshach? What's that? What's that? We don't know. There's no place called Sheshach. See what that is? It's a cipher. It's a cipher. The name Sheshach is a cipher. You know what a cipher is, right?
Oh, it's a substitution.
Yeah, it's a substitution. So if you reverse the letters, right? So if you take the first letters of the Hebrew alphabet are Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, we go through it, right? A, B, C, right? Aleph, Bet. So the second letter is a Bet. The last two letters are Shin and Taf, right? So if you take the last two letters, or you keep going through A, B, C, you go through the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, Aleph, Bet, Gimel. So it'd be like if I took the word, let's say I'm trying to say the word, well, that's too easy. But if I wanted to say the USA, I didn't want to say USA. I took what letter U would be on the other end would be like the letter D. The letter S would be the letter, I can't figure it out right now, but the letter H. And I use that initials. I said DHL, but I'm not really saying DHL. I'm really saying USA. But I said it in a way that wouldn't necessarily, it would not necessarily give it. So Bavel,
A little plausible
BBL,
deniability.
yeah, BBL comes out to Sheshach, Shin, Taf. It's Bavel. Like how IBM, right? Exactly. Very good, Jackie. HAL is one of the most famous ones because HAL is IBM, right?
Right.
So that was a cipher by taking the next letter down, right? So this is taking the opposite letters in the Hebrew alphabet. You take the second letter and you make it the 23rd third letter of the Hebrew alphabet and you flip it. So there are versions of that. So that's a number letter cipher. It's a game, if you will. And it's a way of saying Babylonia without saying Babylonia, because he doesn't want to make the Babylonians say, you're prophesizing against us? No, Sheshach, not Babylonia. So it's a cipher. And we know that now. Like we figured that out a long time ago, that it was a way for him to say Babylonia without. And what's he saying? The Babylonians are going to get it too. Don't worry. The Babylonians are going to get it. He's going to get it. The king of Babylonia will get it last, but he's going to get it. And here's using that analogy, that vision of bad drink. Here's what it says.
Say to them, thus said God of hosts, the God of Israel, drink and get drunk and vomit, fall and never rise again because of the sword that I send among you. And if they refuse to take the cup from your hand and drink, say to them, thus said God of hosts, you must drink. If I am bringing the punishment first on the city that bears my name, do you expect to go unpunished? You will not go unpunished, for I am summoning the sword against all the inhabitants of the earth, declares God of hosts.
Yeah. So you think if I'm going to punish Jerusalem, if I'm going to punish my kingdom, you're not going to get punished? Are you kidding me? I'm going to punish my own home. So you're going to get punished. It's inescapable.
You are to prophesy all these things to them, and then say to them, God roars from on high and bellows from the holy dwelling, roaring aloud over the earthly abode and uttering shouts like the grape treaders against all the dwellers on earth. Tumult has reached the ends of the earth, for God has a case against the nations and contends with all flesh, delivering the wicked to the sword, declares God. Thus said God of hosts, disaster goes forth from nation to nation. A great storm is unleashed from the remotest parts of the earth. In that day, the earth shall be strewn with the slain of God from one end to the other. They shall not be mourned or gathered and buried. They shall become dung on the face of the earth. Howl, you shepherds, and yell. Strew dust on yourselves, you lords of the flock, for the day of your slaughter draws near. I will break you in pieces, and you shall fall like a precious vessel. Flight shall fail the shepherds, and escape the lords of the flock. Hark the outcry of the shepherds, and the howls of the lords of the flock, for God is ravaging their pasture. The peaceful meadows shall be wiped out by God's fierce wrath. Like a lion, God has gone forth from the lair. The land has become a desolation because of the oppressive wrath, because of such fierce anger.
Yep. Well, thank you, Rosemary, for ending on such a beautiful, happy tone. But most of Jeremiah, as we know, is that way. But Jeremiah is basically, again, reminding people that there is no place that's going to not be affected by this. And, Judah's going to feel it, but everyone's going to feel it. And it's inescapable. So
to end on a happier note, I couldn't help, when they were talking about the figs, I couldn't help thinking about those dates in the first Indiana Jones movie. Where the monkey dies and he goes, bad dates.
Bad dates. That's right. With the monkey eats it. That's right. Very good, Rosemary. Yeah, no, those are bad. These are bad figs, but yeah, similar thing. People using these images, the figs, the wine. Jeremiah speaks in the language that people understand. Pottery. We read about the pottery last week. But thank you very much. And we're actually going to be starting. It's a good segue. Tomorrow night we're going to be reading Deuteronomy, starting Devarim. We haven't read it, Deuteronomy in a long time. And again, we think that Deuteronomy was perhaps written during this time. That's all I'm going to tell you. Written during the time of Jeremiah, written by the people who are around him. Deuteronomy is, well, we hear it's found by Josiah, right?
Yeah.
So it's right around this time. And so maybe Baruch's own father, Hilkiah, might have been the scribe. Well, he's the priest that finds it. So it's found during this time. And the language is very, very similar in some ways. the language in Deuteronomy really reminds us of this language from Jeremiah. It's a similar kind of poetic and some similar words, some places where we only find this, but it's a good segue. So that's tomorrow night. We're going to start Deuteronomy, Devarim, the last book of the Torah. So thank you so much, Rosemary, for
Thank you.
taking us through this important part of Jeremiah. And again, next week we're gonna be reading it's a little bit different, and we're gonna see some again, it's not in chronological order, but it's going to be talking about some of the other kingdoms and some of the other prophecies against these other nations. What was really powerful about Jeremiah was his prophecies against Babylonia and against that area, which kind of, when we were fighting against Iraq, was a little crazy because Baghdad is built right over the city of Babylon. And so when we were reading about those kinds of things and reading them in the news as they were happening over it's been a while since we were fighting in Iraq, but it was hard when we were watching those things happen, not to think about what was going on during Jeremiah's time and the prophecies that he has against Babylonia, which we'll be reading about in the coming days, the prophecies against those people. So no, not in the morning, because I'm away. We're going to be online. We will be live, but not in person. We'll be live, but not in person.
Okay.
And then next Wednesday is actually Tisha B'Av. We'll be in person on Wednesday night, but it'll also be Tisha B'Av, which is a fast day, which is my birthday. But it's my birthday during the day. But at night, there's not going to be, people said, what are you going to do for your birthday? We're going to go out for dinner. And I said, no, if we're going to have anything for my birthday, it'll have to be during the day on Wednesday. It cannot be at night. But that's why I think we're, anyways. So it is Tisha B'Av, where we talk about the destruction of the Babylonians, and we talk about what that meant for us to lose our kingdom and to watch the end of the Judean, the kingdom of Judah, the Judean dynasty, the dynasty of King David that lasted for 400 years. It's a long time. That's a long dynasty. I mean, that's by dynastic times. That's a long time to have a family in power. But it came to an end. And by the way, Israel today does not like dynasties. We like dynasties in America. We love dynasties. We love to see people's family come back for some reason. I don't know. Israel doesn't like it. Israel doesn't have political dynasties. They don't have families that stay in power. They don't like it. It's too monarchical, they don't like it. They almost don't want to see the family anymore. I mean, there's cases. I mean, Ariel Sharon's son got arrested. I think he went to jail, or if he went to jail,
Well, they have all those rabbinic dynasties, though, don't they?
Yeah, rabbinic dynasties are okay. They're not political dynasties. We don't like political dynasties. I mean,
Well, I don't know. The rabbinic dynasties are trying to get more power, aren't they?
I know, but they're not political. I mean, they're
Well,
trying
if
to
they
get
get more power, won't
they're
they
trying to
have be
get power
political?
for their religious interests. They're not trying to get political. They're not trying to be in charge of the government. They don't want to. They don't. If you really press them, they don't like the fact, to some extent, that there isn't even a Jewish government in some cases. But only King David only his family can be in power. But the weird thing is that the average Israeli does not like political power. Ben Gurion's kids never had power. Golda Meir's family, you never heard of them. Israel doesn't like to see those kinds of things. They really don't. Every time that anybody's tried to use their political power, from intergenerationally, they don't like it. For better or worse, Israel doesn't want to have that kind of situation. In America, we don't care. I mean, keep people in power and their families in power forever. We seem to love that for some reason, but they don't love it in Israel. All right, folks, we will see you. We'll be online next Tuesday, or we'll see you tomorrow night in person. And we'll be in person on Friday night for services with Rebbe Soul. So if you haven't seen Rebbe Soul in person, definitely something to see. He's a great musician and he lives
I'm
in San
looking
Francisco. So whenever we
some
get him to
Reddit
come down,
soul,
awesome.
Reddit soul.
And then Rick and Addie will be here next Friday. So next Fridays will be in person. Take care, everybody. We'll see you.
Thanks, Reverend.
Everybody.
Bye-bye.
We'll see you
Bye,
tomorrow.
everybody.